Have you ever looked at another woman's faith life and thought, why does she look so put together while my faith life feels so messy? Maybe she's consistent in ways that you're not, so you think. Or maybe she sounds confident, disciplined, unwavering because she's telling you. And quietly, without realizing it, you start measuring yourself against her. It usually sounds like something like this. I should want what she wants. If I were doing all the right things, my faith would look more like hers. Or what's wrong with me if I can't seem to keep up? Before long, the comparison settles in, not loudly, but persistently. It's not envy, but is inadequacy, or at least feels that way. And here's the part that most Christian women, especially if you're a leader, an entrepreneur, or really a high capacity professional, you never stop to question and you think your faith is failing, but it isn't. And it's just that the mold that you're trying to grow inside of is failing you. I know you love God. I know you're committed. You take responsibility everywhere else in your life. But when it comes to your faith, you've likely been handed this narrow picture of what growth actually looks like, what it's supposed to look like. And when you don't fit that, you assume that the problem is you. In this conversation, what I want to talk about today is that we're going to look at 3 things that I hope will change everything. First, why we get pulled into these traditional faith molds and these comparison traps, even when our intentions are really good. Second, how those paradigms quietly create guilt and pressure and spiritual exhaustion when they don't align with how you're designed. And third, what becomes possible when you take personal responsibility for your faith growth with confidence in God's unique design of you. This isn't about you trying harder or doing more. It's about letting go of all of those borrowed expectations and growing with God in a way that actually fits your real life. Hey there, wise woman. This is Deneen TB, your faith, growth, and work alignment strategist, helping driven Christian women, professionals, and business owners really design a faith growth rhythm with practices that actually fit their lives without the pressure of doing more, so that you can live with purpose and live out your mission and create lasting influence for God in your work and in your life. So let's get started with what first we have to look at, and that is why we get stuck in this faith mold. Most Christian women don't start out by comparing their faith to others. This actually happens very slowly, and often it's unintentionally. Because we learn early on that spiritual growth is something that you can see. What does that mean? That means like regular church attendance or consistent quiet times or participation in Bible studies and groups and different programs. None of these are actually bad. They are good, many of them. But over time, they become proxies for growth. Those visible markers that help us answer that unspoken question, am I doing this right? So we look around and we notice the women who never miss a study. We notice that one who tells us about her journaling every morning. We see the one that really seems confident and grounded and spiritually steady. And without realizing it, we start borrowing from her blueprint. Here's what often happens, and this is where I think the problem begins. Not in the practices themselves, but in the assumption behind those practices. That if the method worked for that person, for her over there, then it should work for you too. That faith growth is primarily about replicating behaviors rather than responding to your design. This is especially powerful for you as a high capacity person, if you're a leader, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a professional, because you're wired already to learn and adapt and apply what works in your work setting. So when you see someone else's faith rhythm looking really effective, you try to adopt it with sincerity and discipline. But instead of feeling closer to God, what do you feel? You start to feel behind. You start to feel inconsistent. You start to feel spiritually inadequate. Not because you're not faithful, but because the model was never built to bring in your wiring, the season of life that you're in, the calling that God has for you. I see this really often with women who are deeply committed to God, but also live very full, demanding lives. Is that you? I hear them say things like, I know I should be more consistent with my quiet time in the morning, but my brain doesn't engage that way. Or they might say something like, I feel closest to God when I'm actually working or thinking, when I'm not sitting still. Or I hear them say, I keep starting and stopping because I can't make it look like what I've been taught it should look like. So what happens? They try again and again and again. And each restart actually chips away the confidence until faith begins to feel like just another area in their life where they're failing. What really is happening here isn't a lack of discipline or devotion. I love this word. It's misalignment. Because those traditional faith molds, what they do is they assume that there's one primary way for you to connect to God. There's one rhythm, one practice that equals maturity. There's one visible standard of faithfulness. But you know what? Scripture never presents spiritual growth as uniform. God doesn't, mass produce our faith journeys. He forms them. And when we confuse faithfulness with fitting into a mold, comparison becomes inevitable. And what happens is joy quietly disappears. You see, that's the real hidden cost of comparison. When a faith model doesn't fit how you're designed, the damage isn't immediate. It's very, very subtle. At first, you simply tell yourself, well, you know what? I just need to be a little bit more consistent. Or I just need a little bit more discipline. Or you know what? I'll get back on track next week. But over time, what started out as that really good intention becomes quiet pressure. Because when the model says, this is what growth looks like, and you can't sustain it, the only conclusion left is that you tell yourself that I must be doing something wrong. Guilt doesn't usually come from sin in this scenario. It comes from that word again, misalignment. You're trying to force yourself into these rhythms, into these routines and practices that don't match how you process. They don't honor your energy or the season of life that you're in. They don't align with how you naturally connect to God. So every time you fall off the plan, guilt steps in. It's not even conviction. It's not even correction. But this low-level sense of spiritual failure that just kind of follows you around like a black cloud. And because you care about your faith, you don't quit. What do? If you're like me, you push harder. This is why so many Christian women, you as a leader, entrepreneur, professional, I'm talking to you, this is where you hit the breaking point. Because you're already carrying all this responsibility everywhere else in your life because you manage decisions, you lead people, you solve problems. So when your faith becomes another area where you're constantly behind or feel that way, you don't feel like it's nurturing you. You don't feel like you're doing anything to move forward, it's actually depleting you. So eventually, faith starts to feel like just another box that you can't quite check off every day, or another standard that you cannot maintain, or another place where you feel truly disappointed in yourself. And the exhaustion isn't just physical, it's spiritual. Again, women tell me, I know God loves me, but I feel like I'm always letting him down. They also say that, I want to want spiritual things more, but I'm so tired. Or they say things like, I feel disconnected, and then I feel guilty for feeling disconnected. Have you said any of those things to yourself? And that cycle is not a sign of weak faith. It's a result of trying to grow spiritually in a way that doesn't fit your design. So here is the truth that most women never hear. Spiritual exhaustion is often the fruit of faith practiced without alignment. I'm going to say it again. Spiritual exhaustion is often the fruit of faith practiced without alignment. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When faith growth ignores how God uniquely designed you, your wiring, your strength, that season, that situation you're in, it slowly drains your joy, your confidence, and your connection with him. Not because God is distant, but because the pathway that you're walking isn't yours. And until that changes, guilt will keep masquerading as motivation while quietly wearing you down. So, what changes when you take personal responsibility for your faith? That's the real turning point. When you stop trying to grow your faith by copying someone else's journey and instead take personal responsibility for it, something quiet but powerful begins to happen. Faith starts feeling not like an obligation. It starts feeling like a relationship again. Taking responsibility for your faith growth doesn't mean doing more. It means owning how God has designed you to grow with him and in him. So instead of asking, why can't I be more like her over there? Begin asking, how has God uniquely wired me to connect to him? And that's the question that changes everything. When faith aligns with your design and your season, you replace guilt with clarity. You trade pressure for peace, and you move from inconsistency to sustainable rhythm. Not because your life gets simpler. Oh, I don't think that's going to happen. But because faith finally feels integrated into your real life instead of being in competition with it. Women tell me after they've been through my program is that they feel like they can breathe again. They say they actually notice God throughout their day. They say, I'm growing without forcing myself to be someone that I'm not. That's what alignment does. It restores your confidence. Here's something else that I think is really important that we often overlook because it's really subtle. And that's the confidence doesn't come from having that perfect faith routine. It comes from knowing why your faith looks the way it does and really trusting that God is at work in you. When you understand your design, you stop second guessing yourself. You stop restarting every time your life shifts in some way and you stop outsourcing your spiritual growth into someone's external hands, thinking that's going to help you. Instead, you walk forward with intention, with awareness, with peace. Faith becomes something that you actually steward, not something you're chasing after all the time. This kind of growth, well, it isn't loud and it isn't flashy. It looks like this. Looks like maybe noticing God in your work or responding to Him in real time or growing steadily even in busy seasons. Why? Because it's rooted, it's integrated, it's alive. And more importantly, it is totally and personally yours. Here's what I want you to hear. You don't need a new version of yourself to grow spiritually. You just need a framework that honors the one that God has already designed for you. And when you give yourself permission and guidance to grow in alignment with that design, faith stops feeling heavy and it starts to become this steady, life-giving force that it was always meant to be. This is what's possible when faith becomes personal. When your spiritual life is shaped by your design, your wiring, your current season in mind, something important actually shifts. You stop measuring yourself against what others are doing because you finally understand why your faith looks the way it does. And you begin to recognize God's presence, not just in the structured moments like going to church or being at a study or in a small group, but you find it woven throughout your everyday rhythms. When you go to work, when you make decisions, when you are in relationships with others. So instead of starting and stopping, you grow with a consistency that is and feels sustainable. And instead of second guessing yourself, you move forward with clarity, with confidence. Not because you've mastered faith, but because you have a faith that finally fits you. And that's exactly what the personalized faith plan was created to support. Not a new set of rules, not another one-size-fits-all system, but a framework that helps you to understand how God has uniquely designed you to grow, to identify what's been quietly blocking your progress, and to really create those rhythms and practices that align with your real life without any guilt, without any pressure added. It's not about copying someone else's spiritual journey. It's about stewarding your own with intention and trust. So why does this matter more than ever? Well, we live in a world where comparison is constant. Right? We see it on social media all the time. And we also see that spiritual burnout is very common. But God isn't calling you to replicate someone else's faith. He's inviting you into your own. And that begins with a simple but powerful decision. So I want you to say this to yourself. 1, I will stop measuring my faith by someone else's journey. 2, I will take responsibility for growing with God in the way that He designed me. Stop the video if you need to. I want you to tell those things to yourself. That choice, what you just said to yourself, does not lead to pressure. It leads to freedom. So, if you're saying yes, if this is resonating with you, if you're ready to release that comparison and really step into clarity, I want to invite you to my upcoming free virtual workshop. It's called Find Your Faith Shape, which is where we start. Create rhythms and practices that fit your life and step into your mission with confidence. And invite you to the next one. You can see down in the description where you can click. Inside this experience, it's a 3-hour real workshop. You'll discover why traditional faith models may not be working for you. We'll dive into that a little bit more, and how God has uniquely designed you to grow spiritually. We'll talk about your faith shape and what that really means, and what it looks like to move forward with this confidence instead of comparison. So make sure to get your spot and click on that link and find out the next date so that you can participate with us. You're never behind. You're just never meant to be a copy. So I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to share down in the comments, answering this question. What would it look like for you to take personal responsibility for your faith growth without copying someone else's journey? What does that even mean for you? Let's have some discussion down in the comments. Would love to chat with you. And I'd love to see you at my next virtual workshop event. This is Deneen TB. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, be filled to overflowing.